You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi, and thanks again for joining me on my journey in Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. We are now into, and in fact now out of, Massachusetts, and we've had some company for the past couple of days, so we're going to come to that later. We noticed the climb is getting steeper and some of the terrain is a lot muddier, but we're still pushing forward. One of our listeners, his name's Jash, which he refers to himself as Jash, just a section hiker. He tells me that I'm starting to sound fatigued. Well, I am. I've walked 1,600 miles. Really, though, I've been recording either late at night or really early in the morning, so you're probably hearing me at that in my voice. Don't worry about me. I've still got enough strength to get these last 1,600 miles. Let's hear now about what went on day number 127. Day number 127, US Route 20, mile 1552.1 to K Woods Shelter, mile 1568.1, a 16-mile day. Trigger and I have always been very eager to get ourselves some decent breakfast in the morning, and while the motel we stayed at was okay, the breakfast just wasn't going to cut it for us. So we found Joe's Diner in Lee, which was just the sort of thing we need. Apparently the Joe's Diner had been around for 50 years, so we kind of assumed that Joe might have worked out how to make breakfast, and we were not disappointed. The service was pretty slow because it was one of those unfortunate things. Not one of the members of staff didn't turn up, but the food was great. We really enjoyed it, and Trigger got a wrap to take out to eat for lunch. And while we were in there, people. This happens to us often. People engage us in conversation because we look pretty revolting, I guess. And Trigger and I were chatting to these people, and they learned that we were on the trail. And this old guy and his wife were there having their breakfast, which I suspect they do every single morning. And he said, "Oh, I'd love to take you back to the trail." So we piled into his Chevy and put our stuff, our dirty bodies and our dirty packs in his car, and he was very happy with that. And he drove us back up the mountain to Route 20, where we'd been picked up the day before, which was great. So we're back at Route 20 again. And immediately we had an 800-foot climb. And then we had, and funnily enough, these climbs, they are getting longer, but they don't seem to be that bad at the moment. I find that we're both coping with the climbing quite well. I mean, it's still tiring and still, I can feel it in my legs all the time, and I stop quite regularly and top up with water. But really, I don't think that we're doing them too badly at the moment. Then when we got to the top, realised we were there, which is great. I don't have to keep stopping to check, how far I am from the top anymore. We get up there and we start walking along some flat areas, and we realise we're at the top, which is great. And then there's a few miles along the top before dropping down to Finity Pond. Finity Pond is another one of those beautiful ponds, which I just love. They're at some sort of elevation, quite a bit of elevation. Lovely view, but no real access to the water. But we didn't particularly want to get any water from the pond anyway. I never particularly like it. I far prefer to get my water from the stream. And about 7 miles into the hike, we'd planned to stop at October Mountain Shelter. The weather was fine, but they said around lunchtime there'd be possible rain. So Trigger and I had both decided that this would be a good place to stop. It was around the time the rain was due to start, and it did start spitting with rain literally 50 yards before I got to the shelter. And of course, I went for a fall. I crossed a stream which you meant to get water at just before the shelter, and I fell right onto my knee, and it didn't hurt me too badly, but I had to call out fall number 100, number 20, it didn't hurt me. It's funny, when I fall, I tend to do it. I feel I'm doing it in slow motion. I could see that my knee was going to land on just earth and not, or compacted mud rather, and not any rocks. So I felt reasonably comfortable falling. I mean, it hurt a bit and I shouted out, but I got straight up and went straight to the shelter, and there was Trigger. He'd hiked ahead of me again. We sat and had lunch, and a few spots of rain fell, but really wasn't that much. And so we were soon on our way again. And fate clearly did not want me to be on number 20 for very long, because about an hour later, half hour later, there was fall number 21. I was crossing some of these planks, and in Massachusetts, because it is quite a muddy state and the water doesn't seem to drain away desperately well, the trail maintainers have put these sets of planks down. Planks are supported by blocks at either end, and you walk along planks for quite a long time sometimes. And one of them just must have been a bit too wet, or my shoe was a bit too wet, and I slid and just went over and I fell on my hip again, which is about the third time I've fallen on the same side of my hip. It's actually making my sleeping a little bit more difficult, to be honest with you, because I normally sleep on my right side, and my hip is hurting a bit now. Anyway, we got to Blotts Road, and there was Trail Magic there. Trigger and I had planned to follow up. We've been doing this a few times recently, going into town, getting a few beers and a burger or something, and then going out and doing the last 4 or 5 miles of the day. But I particularly wanted to go and watch the USA versus England World Cup ladies soccer match. So there was this Trail Magic there. We had some water and a few bits of food. And Trigger started trying to hitch, and we were getting nowhere with the hitching. And I suddenly thought to myself, I wonder whether I can get the game on my phone. And I could. So I sat and watched the entire match, all 2 hours of it. Well, people came and went. The guy gave us Trail Magic, and we were just hanging out with this guy, but I was watching the football match, and I really, really enjoyed it. And Trigger was quite happy to sit around. The guy actually does Trail Magic up and down, from Tennessee up to where we were, and he's got a sofa in the back of his van, which Trigger sat on quite happily. And there were still 4 miles to the shelter, the Kaywood shelter, which is a rather nice shelter, I must say. There were 2 French Canadians there. They'd set a fire, so it always makes it kind of comforting and warm and so on. And then the Aussie we've met before, his name's Bullseye. A 19-year-old lad who hikes with him called Swetsicle, which is a great name, and quite a quiet guy, an ex-military guy called Riggs. They turned up, and so they all set up their tent sites. Trigger and I set up our tent sites. Really good tent sites, by the way, nice and flat. I highly recommend the Kaywood shelter. It's got a privy, and it's got 2 bed boxes, and really good tent sites. And the water was excellent. So the Canadians started a fire, as I say, so we just sat around and ate dinner before retiring to bed. So that is the end of day number 127. Day number 128, Kaywood Shelter, mile 1568.1, to Mark Nopel Shelter, mile 1584.8, a 16.7 mile day. We got up in our normal 5 o'clock rush to get up. Normally these days, actually, I'm waking up about 4:50 before the alarm goes off, so I turn my alarm off, and it never goes off these days. I sleep in pretty well in my tent. As I say, I've had a bit of problems with my hip recently, so it's been a little bit tougher than it has been until now. But we knew we wanted breakfast, but I'm still getting into this thing of just sitting in my tent, but making my coffee first thing. And I had actually the Breakfast of Champions Pop-Tarts with my coffee on this particular morning. And we eventually got out because we knew we were going to try to get some breakfast in Dalton. And Dalton was only about 3 miles downhill, we thought. Well, when the map says downhill, don't believe it. There's a big uphill. I don't know where I didn't see that on the map, or on the map, in fact. And it took us a bit by surprise, so we were desperate for breakfast. And we got into Dalton. You go through the town, and Trigger stopped at an auto shop. He's had a bit of a problem with one of his poles, and one of his locks is locked way too tight, and he can't undo it. And we went into an auto shop, and they had a vice, and he seems to know about this sort of thing, and tried to open it, but no one there could open it, so that was a bit of a drag. So he's going to have to keep his poles exactly as they were. So we go further along into Dalton. We look on the maps and find there's a place called Juice and Java for breakfast, where we were assured they sold us eggs. So we get off the trail, go down to Juice and Java, and it was a lovely little place. It's one of these modern little coffee places, but it is some great food. And both of us had 2 breakfasts. It's 6 eggs between, 12 eggs between the two of us. We had 6 eggs each, which I know is probably not good. But you need a bit of some calories inside you before you do a big climb out of town, which of course we were going to be doing. And once again, it was a climb out of town and then walking along at the top and then the climb down into Cheshire. It was another hot day, and we felt that as well. We've been getting really hot days, mid to late 80s, and even 90 at one stage as well. So the heat is really getting to us. Anyway, we climbed down into Cheshire. We intended to stop at Cheshire. I'll tell you why in a minute. But when we were on the way down into Cheshire, we saw a sign for the Cheshire Cobble. And it's a marble. I think the rocks there are marble, and it's beautiful. And we went down this little pathway to the Cheshire Cobble, and this little open area. It's kind of almost sandy with these rocks splayed around. You can sit on really comfortable rocks overlooking the beautiful, beautiful valley down below, and Cheshire in the distance. Absolutely glorious. So we sat there for an early lunch, even though we were meeting somebody for lunch. And I recalled actually at the time that when I did this last time, I went down the wrong side of the mountain. I took a complete detour. I remember it started pouring with rain, and then I got bigger and bigger hailstones, and I got totally lost, went down the mountain. Oh, it was a shambles, to be honest with you. But this time, no such problem. And we were actually meeting Mary for lunch, my friend Mary. I don't really recall, I don't know, back in Connecticut, we'd stayed with Mary in her guest house, and she was the one who did play guitar in the pubs on the 4th Thursday of the month. And Mary had a shirt for me because one of the listeners, Kim, had contacted me and asked me if I needed anything. She'd seen some Columbia stuff in a sale and she wanted to buy me a shirt, which I thought was very nice. And I said, well, I'd like a blue shirt, please. So he got me this beautiful blue shirt and mailed it to Mary's. Well, the mail didn't work out because we then left. And Mary said, well, when it turns up, I'll forward it to you. Well, we were up in... she was down in Connecticut. We were in Massachusetts. So she drove about an hour and a quarter to get to us. I mean, she met us for lunch, which was really, really nice. And she had lunch with us, and we had a couple of beers, our normal thing these days, and tons to eat. And it was lovely to see her. Lovely to get the shirt from Kim, and also she put some cookies in as well, which was very nice. And I shared those out with some people on the trail. After lunch, there was a climb out of Cheshire towards Mount Greylock, which is Mount Greylock is the tallest, the highest point in Massachusetts. And I seem to remember last time when I did this, I came out of Cheshire and went all the way up to Mount Greylock and then down part the other way. Man, that was a long way to go, because there was a shelter on the way up the hill, on the way up the mountain. And the shelter was a 1,600-foot climb up the mountain. So we decided to break that climb into 2. So leaving Cheshire, we went up the 1,600 feet to the shelter, and we stopped there. And it was a good place to stop because there were a couple of people we knew. Grateful was there. We met Grateful, if you recall, back in Sheffield. I'm not even sure I mentioned it actually. She was staying with Jez Treat's place, so we'd met her before, and she was there in a tent, and a couple of other people we knew were there as well. Great tent sites, great water again, and Massachusetts has been very, very good for shelters and the stuff that goes around a shelter. You know, the privies are excellent as privies can be, and there's a bear box and all those things you like, and the tent sites are deliberately set up as proper tent sites. There are some wooden ones, but there's also some flat earth ones, and I really have enjoyed setting my tent up, and the water was beautiful at this place, running fast and very, very cold, really glorious. So that was the end of day number 128. day number 129, Mark Nopel Shelter, mile 1584.8 to Mass Route 2, mile 1594.4, just a 9.6 mile day. We knew that the next couple of days were going to be different, with likely much shorter miles. Trigger resisted this, by the way. He didn't resist what was happening, but he was resisting the shorter miles. But I'll tell you about that later. His son and two of his stepsons were coming to visit, and they wanted to hike with us, which is really nice of them to do that. They were driving all the way through the night, and they were trying to keep in contact with Trigger, so we knew roughly where they knew where we were, and we knew where they were, so we could try to liaise to meet them. But we knew where we were heading for the day, and we knew that we'd be stopping at Mass Route 2, which was in Williamstown, where they had booked some motel rooms and where we were all going to stay. And we still had, though, that morning, an 800-foot climb first thing to get to the top of Mount Greylock, the highest point in Massachusetts. And as always, we woke up early, and as recently a few times, I made me coffee and had my Pop-Tarts, my breakfast of champions yet again, and that gave me some calories to get started with. But we were also looking forward to breakfast at the top of Greylock, because I knew there was some place we could get some breakfast as well. And on the way up, we passed another one of those wonderful ponds, another lake elevation. It's fairly small, but still great to see. And these climbs, and I know it was quite a ways up, and we know the climb's getting bigger, but I'm really feeling pretty good about it. Once you get some calories inside you, you start pumping your arms and pumping your legs and pushing your way uphill. I'm finding we're getting up those mountains better and better. And I don't know whether the climb was easier, but it seemed easier to me. And we got up the top around, I don't know, I think it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and there were very few people around. It was July the 4th after all. And later on that day, it would have been kind of nice actually to have stayed at the top there, because July the 4th, there would have been incredible fireworks to see, because the views were just spectacular all around. It was a beautiful, clear day. It's very, very warm. And there was a little bit of breeze, which was nice. And we saw actually some people turning up with hang gliders. And an hour or so later, they were going to jump off the top of the mountain, to be honest. That's really what they were doing. So we took some pictures and took in the views, and we went to Bascombe Lodge. And Bascombe Lodge is just down from the War Memorial at the top. And it is what it says it is. It's a lodge. It's got bunk beds. You can stay in there. And there's breakfast, of course, which, of course, was appealing to both Trigger and I. So we tucked into plenty of breakfast, as you can imagine. And we sat there for a long time. We were joined by Grateful, the lady we'd met, as I mentioned, at Jess Treats in Sheffield. And we sat there and just had coffee and more breakfast. And we had too much coffee, really. And that may have given Trigger a few problems later, which I'll come back to. He was on the phone to his boys on the way down quite a bit. But what a climb down it was. Whereas the uphill had seemed fine for us. We'd done it over 2 days, admittedly, because we stopped to the shelter. It wasn't bad at all, but the climb down seemed endless. And as I think I've said before, these endless climbs up and down are tough, but the climb downs, which are endless, are really tough on the knees. And even on my knees, which have been really strong recently, were giving me a few twinges towards the end. But Trigger was absolutely spent. We eventually made it, and he knew the boys knew where we were. And he had to sit down on the floor. To recover. He was in a terrible mess, I must say. And I'd imagine the boys must have been nervous when they saw him, actually. He looked dreadful. But he seemed to recover when he saw them a bit and took some water and a few extra electrolytes. And that may well be it. He'd had all that coffee, and coffee's a diuretic. He may have been dehydrated. He certainly had all the signs of being dehydrated. But after plenty more water, and the boys had brought some water with them as well for us, he insisted on walking further into Williamstown and seemed to improve a bit. The amount of coffee we'd had been so much. We'd just been sitting there for an hour or so, just glugging the coffee down. I'm sure that didn't help us. But when we got there, the boys came again to pick us up, because they'd actually gone back. They'd driven up Greylock to look at it while Trigger and I did the last mile or so further into Williamstown. And they booked into a motel, and we went out for beers and food later. Trigger, of course, ordered tons of food, and we had a couple of beers each. So Trigger had come back, and I was kind of relieved. It was the worst I'd seen him on the entire trip, so it was good to see him back to form. But that's the end of day number 129. Day number 130, County Road, mile 1601.6, southbound to Mass Route 2, mile 1594.4, a 7.2 mile backwards day. Quite how we were going to hike with the boys had not been worked out by anybody. Trigger wanted us to have an 18-mile day, which was the next proper road and the proper place to stop, the place you would normally expect to stop. But I said, that can't be right. That's way too much. It's too much even for us. The forecast was for a 90-degree day. And I think the two of us would have had a problem with a 90-degree day and 18 miles. So I tried to call a shuttle guy, and he gave me really good info. And he said, really, the best you can do is the best you can do in terms of getting to the trail and then walking back to Mass Route 2, which is what our plan was, because I wanted to give the guys an experience of the trail, but make sure that they enjoyed it and they were comfortable on the trail. And 18 miles would have killed them, so it would have been an up and then a down. I wanted them to start partway up the mountain and walk a couple of ups, but then mainly down the mountain back to where we'd start. And this guy said, there's a 7-mile day from County Road, and I can take you there, he said, but I can't do it till about 11 o'clock. So we went for breakfast. We wanted to get started before it got too hot in the day, but even then it was still must have been up in the 80s at about 7:30 or even 7 o'clock this morning. But we went for breakfast, but found a decent diner nearby. And so we talked about it and said, well, we've got to try to get a lift. And the boys talked a guy into it. I don't know how they did. I mean, I was just waiting. We were back at the motel, and the guys were wandering around, found a guy who talked him into it. It was just great. And we headed up, and the road got worse and worse and worse. I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this isn't a road I'd like to be bringing my car up, let alone this guy doing it. But he seemed quite relaxed. He knew exactly where he was. And we eventually got to the small parking spot, which was where the trail came out. So we knew we had a 7.2 mile hike, mainly downhill. We got set up. The guys had day packs. We had some water. So it was nice for us to have lighter packs on ourselves as well. We had a good diversity of trail. It was mainly downhills, but there was some quite stiff little ups, so they knew what it was like to climb, and they certainly were sweating when they were climbing. And but the real feature of this particular day was some very, very tricky rocks to climb down. When they give you an alternate wet weather route, you can tell that you're about to hit something pretty bad. And we saw this Blue Blaze alternate route, so we knew the rocks were going to be bad. But the young guys, they're guys in their 30s or late 20s, they handled it really, really well, and we all got down safely, which was terrific as well. We got them drinking stream water, which is something they're probably not used to either, which we filtered obviously, and they really kind of. It was great for me to observe Trigger interacting with his boys and them interacting with him. He's not a person I've got to know in that way before, and it was lovely for me to see him with them, and they seemed to be having a blast the whole time. They were running down to the stream, then running up the mountain to get back to where the trail was. They were just full of energy, and it was really a lot of fun. So when we got back to the motel, I asked the boys what they thought of their day and what they thought of the Appalachian Trail. Okay, I'm here with 3 young guys. They probably like being called young guys. They've got 8 kids between them, I think it is, something like that, or 7 kids between them. Could you introduce yourselves?
My name is Daniel from Louisville, and came up here to hike with Bob, or Trigger.
Trigger.
He's my stepfather, so came up here to visit him in Massachusetts.
My name is Keel. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. Came up here to hike with my dad, Trigger.
Cool.
Share a few miles for him on his spectacular journey.
It's just spectacular.
My name is David. I'm from Northern Kentucky and came up here to hike with Trigger as well.
We've just had 7 miles in 90-degree weather. What are your general impressions of the trail?
The trail was awesome. It was very well maintained. Everybody along it was very friendly. It was a cool experience. Very, very scenic and pretty.
Yeah. Did you find it tough or not?
Yeah, certain parts.
Yeah.
I think the 18 would have been real tough today, but the 7 wasn't too bad.
Yeah, what we haven't said yet is that Trigger really wanted to do 18 today. So how do you think you would have felt once we got back in the car after 18?
Yeah, I think 7 was a good day today for us. So
it was a good call.
Being new hikers.
That's right. So how did what was your impression of it, Kill?
My impression initially, I guess I thought that it would be, we hear about the monotony of you guys that, day in, day out doing the same thing. And I don't know, I felt like my mind was going the whole time because you have to worry about all the rocks and roots and everything. I felt like you always got to be alert and there's not any downtime in terms of that. And I thought that was kind of...
that surprised you?
That surprised me, definitely. Yeah. It was, you got to worry about where that foot goes,
every single
step. I think I was in maybe a quarter mile, half a mile, and already had a misstep. So, I thought that was pretty shocking.
Yeah, we had plenty of those. We had plenty of those. What do you think about that climb down on the rocks? Remember that?
It was rocky. Yeah, I was actually expecting a very difficult day, and parts of it were challenging and kind of tough on my feet at times. But walking downhill, for the most part, was nice.
That did help. Help. Can you imagine if we'd had about another 11 miles, of which about 9 is uphill?
That would have been difficult. Absolutely.
Now, did you think your dad could do this? Do you think Trigger could do this before he started? And what do you think of it? What he's done so far?
I'm very impressed with what he's done so far. I knew he had the mental willpower. I was hoping he wasn't going to get injured or anything along the way because I knew that was probably what was. If he did get injured, that probably would set him back.
Yeah.
But it's been awesome. He's been able to maintain what he's been doing. So
has it surprised you guys?
No, not me. No, I felt like his mentality, and I think like most people that get to the 1,600 mile mark where we are about now, that probably everybody's kind of has that stubborn mentality. I'll call it. Where, definitely. Where you put something in your mind or something pops in your mind, and you're going to see it through. And he's kind of always been that way. So, kind of like what Daniel said there, that I thought the only thing that kind of keep him from going would be something on the physical side.
Yeah.
So
and seeing it today, did it give you the taste you'd like to do a little bit more of it, or would you ever think you'd ever do anything like this?
I would definitely do more of it. I don't know that I can commit 5 months or 6 months, to do the entire thing, but I think. Taking a long weekend or maybe even a week at a time.
Yeah, there's something about being in the woods, isn't there? Don't you think so?
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
Because I can see you guys. It was interesting to watch you guys like playing around like kids in the woods, running down to the water and stuff like that. It's just great down there.
We grew up with woods behind our house, so we grew up that way. But I can never do that or want to dedicate 5 to 6 months to do the whole thing. But portions of it would be fun to do.
As long as there's a hotel close by.
Yeah, we try to do that as well. Well, you know what, guys? I'm really pleased you came. Your dad, I know, was tickled pink that you really came up and supported him, and we really enjoyed your company.
Thank you for having us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So there you go. We've had company and we've slowed down. And the mileage hasn't been as much as we might have liked, but I haven't changed my projection of a finish around August the 26th. I know that the climbs will start to intensify, and I really think that we're coping with these climbs better and better. It seems that we're managing our height pretty well and that we know our limitations. With just 3 states to go, we've got Katahdin well and truly in our sights. I'll see you next time.